What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here, back to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the original broadcast of Steven Spielberg's early cult classic, Duel, written by the great Richard Matheson. While the movie did have a subsequent international theatrical release with a longer running time, nonetheless, it was November 13th, 1971, when Duel was first shown as part of the ABC series Movie of the Week. And Duel is one of many movies that makes 1971 my favorite year of filmmaking ever. If you're not familiar with the movie, the story follows a businessman driving along the highway who suddenly finds himself locked in this duel to the death with the scariest damn tractor trailer that you've ever laid eyes on. At times it feels like a classic gritty 70s trucker movie, other times it looks and feels like a western, and if you wanted to make the case for it as a horror movie, you probably could given some of the musical choices by composer Billy Goldenberg, but in the end, Duel is just a lean and mean and very entertaining thriller. And it's always refreshing seeing a movie where the director knows precisely what movie they're trying to make, and then very much succeeding on their own terms. And I just rewatched the movie for this video, and I think the movie has not aged a day in 50 years. Sadly, some of Steven Spielberg's recent projects don't compare all that favorably. I thought Ready Player One was the poster child of the kind of nauseating nostalgia that is utterly crippling to any form of creativity, and as far as his upcoming remake of West Side Story goes, I'd rather spend my evenings staring directly into the corner of my apartment, and this is coming from someone who proudly played alto sax with the pit band during our high school performance of that musical. But all negativity aside, I have a deep love and affection for a lot of Spielberg's movies. I grew up at a time where his name was synonymous with movie magic. His movies gave so many of us a sense of awe and wonder, and as a little kid, I got to see in the theater movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, making me a fan for life. And obviously, Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind are landmark movies of the 1970s, movies that I've seen many, many times. But as is often the case with many successful filmmakers, Steven Spielberg first really made a name for himself by making a down-and-dirty, low-budget genre film. Prior to Duel, he'd worked on some shows like Night Gallery, and of course he had his early short films like Amblin, which he named his company after. But it's with Duel that we got our first real taste of the greatness to come in the career of Steven Spielberg. So let's start with the fellow who wrote this thing, Richard Matheson, one of the coolest writers of the 20th century. He was the author behind the book I Am Legend, which has been adapted into movies many times over. My personal favorite is his brilliant horror novel Hell House, which is right here on my bookshelf. But he also wrote 16 episodes of The Twilight Zone and countless short stories, including the story that became Duel, which he based on a personal experience he had with a tailgating truck driver, coincidentally on the day of JFK's assassination. And the story eventually got published in Playboy magazine, and then almost as if to prove that there was indeed somebody out there who read Playboy for the articles, Steven Spielberg's secretary told him about the story, and more importantly, that ABC was actively looking to hire someone to direct Richard Matheson's screenplay adaptation of his own story. Long story short, Spielberg got the gig and he proceeded to shoot the hell out of it in record time on a lean budget of $450,000. I've read some reports that the film was shot in 12 days, others claim 16, and then of course there were the extra scenes that he shot for the longer international cut of the film. But I'm still amazed that Spielberg was able to crank out a movie with this level of stunt work and production value so quickly. It helps that the plot has absolutely zero fat on the bone. So many movies out there overstayed their welcome with useless filler scenes, but this movie just gets right down to it. The movie starts with what I find to be an eerily ominous POV sequence with the driver as they leave Los Angeles and head out into the desert. And our hero is the humble and unassuming David Mann, played by Dennis Weaver. Now, the only other movie I've ever seen him in is Orson Welles' classic film noir, Touch of Evil.
It's a mess. Awful mess. Where? They think I'm going to clean it up. They got enough thing coming. Terrible, terrible brawl. Cabin number 7.
Where his character was just weird as hell, but he's still a little jittery and a little strange in this movie with a few lines that are callbacks to that earlier performance.
If you think you can take that truck of yours and just use it as a murder weapon, just killing people on the highway, well, you're wrong. You've got another thing coming.
But you could easily argue that his character in this movie, he's a little passive-aggressive, perhaps a bit of a coward judging from a phone call that he has with his wife. And his duel with the truck, it starts out innocently enough, a little misunderstanding, a little mutual road rage, a situation we can all relate to, but what makes this conflict so compelling is that we never learn a goddamn thing about man's adversary. Conventional Hollywood thinking would demand that we get some stupid backstory or an arc or some details that audiences will find relatable about the truck driver. All we know about him is what his boots look like and that he's hell-bent upon tormenting men into an early grave. And when Kerry Lofton, who played the trucker, asked Spielberg the typical actor question about what his motivation was, Spielberg apparently replied, "You're a dirty, rotten, no-good son of a bitch." And then according to the same story, Lofton replied, "Kid, you hired the right man. And what's beautiful about this simple economical plot is that it allowed Spielberg to pretty much tell his entire story visually. You could turn the volume off for this movie and still follow it just fine and still be amazed by the way that the scenes are shot and cut together. Of course, you'd miss Weaver's internal monologues and his bizarre accent and what's a pretty amazing one-man show, but I think way too many movies and shows out there rely upon these giant exposition dumps by the characters. Instead, Spielberg whips out every visual trick in the book, from the long takes early on to build suspense, or to the kick-ass Dutch angles and later face-offs between the truck and the car, or the gorgeous lens flares that we see looking into the sunset as the film draws to a close. What's clear with every frame of this movie is that Spielberg is trying to deliver a movie that is as entertaining as possible from start to finish. He claims he approached the movie like a Godzilla movie, but instead of using an actual monster, he used this monster truck. And that truck, it is indeed a goddamn monster. It's covered in rust and it's belting out all this pollution. It's just hell on wheels, and it feels like it might be a close relative of Jaws, as well as the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. And true to its monstrous depiction, when the truck finally goes careening over a cliff to its death, Spielberg famously included the dinosaur roar effect from the 1957 film The Land Unknown, a sound effect that he would later use again after the destruction of Jaws at the hand of Roy Scheider. And speaking of reusing material, Universal was so taken with this film that they reused some scenes a few years later as stock footage in the show The Incredible Hulk. And I learned that by attending the show Kevin Geeks Out here in New York. But Spielberg was so annoyed by what they did, from that point on he had it written into his contracts that his films could not be spliced and diced like that ever again. At any rate, a lot of people look back on the 1970s as the best decade ever for movies about cars and trucks, whether you're talking about gritty classics like Vanishing Point or the original Gone in 60 Seconds or runaway hits like Smokey and the Bandit. But I think that Duel can more than hold its own in their company. The final stunt of the truck slowly but surely plunging over the cliff just kicks so much ass, especially when one considers that they only had the budget for one attempt. They set up 6 cameras, one of which managed to capture all the action in one continuous shot. But all the stunt drivers and cameramen on this movie deserve a massive high five. My personal favorite scene has to be when Man is talking in a phone booth and he doesn't see the truck surging up behind him and he barely jumps out of the way in time, but then he has to contend with all these snakes and spiders that are unleashed by the truck, careening through what has to be the weirdest damn filling station in movie history. And of course now it's impossible to see all those critters and not think ahead to how they're foreshadowing some of the scenes from the first 2 Indiana Jones movies. But overall, this movie just feels like a giant Twilight Zone episode on steroids, like the best episodes of that show, many of which were written by Richard Matheson. Duel is not afraid to leave the audience in the dark with a little bit of mystery, which for my money makes the movie all the more powerful and satisfying. In the end, this is just a movie about a little red car being chased by a much larger vehicle, one that has done so many times before, judging by the multiple license plates hanging like trophies off of its front bumper. So Spielberg now has 50 years of filmmaking under his belt as a director and a producer. He's built studios. He's seen his peers rise and fall. He's an institution and a brand unto himself. He's won all the Oscars that you can win, etc. and so forth. But in spite of all that he's achieved since he made Duel, I still rank it among his better efforts. A movie like Bridge of Spies might show how Spielberg's grown as a filmmaker, and it might feel more like a mature movie. But when it comes to pure, raw cinema, Duel, for me, it represents what's possible visually when a talented young director finds some great material and then rushes out into the desert to make the most entertaining movie that he can. So fingers crossed young directors will continue to discover the movie in the years to come and learn from its example. But for now, I think I've said my piece. Hope you enjoyed this little 50th anniversary flashback review. There are a couple more movies that I want to tackle in a similar fashion between now and New Year's. But if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell. But I can't thank you enough for watching. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.